To the story now, President Cyril Ramaphosa will be submitting his response to the state capture inquiry's recommendations. Parliament says the president's response will outline the steps government is taking to implement the Zondo Commission's recommendations. Ramaphosa is expected to give more information on that in an address to the nation tonight. For now, let's discuss this with Paul Hoffman, Director of Accountability Now. Mr. Hoffman, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. Before we get to tonight's address and what we expect the president to state or say to the nation, let's talk about this weekend. Some could have been tempted to believe that what we saw of the predecessors would have been something that is coordinated, but those who followed politics long enough know there could be no coordination, at least between the former President Zuma and President Thabo Mbeki at the very least, which then leaves us with the reality that these are former presidents' genuine assessments of the state of affairs under President Ramaphosa. What did you make of these addresses that we heard this weekend?
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Mfundo, and good afternoon to your listeners, your viewers at least. I think that it's not surprising that everybody has something to say right now, because in the next few days, the branches of the ANC will make a decision as to whom they will be supporting when the ANC elective conference takes place in December. So the noise that we are hearing, the F for failed, that all three of the previous presidents that you mentioned, that's Mbeki, Motlanthe, and Zuma, seem to have a lot of critical things to say about our current president, Mr. Ramaphosa, but that has to do with faction fighting within the ANC.
So you would say that at this point, these are factional battles that are being fought here. We shouldn't take much of what any of these predecessors are saying.
No, it's all jockeying for position, because obviously the person who is victorious in December is then on the inside track to lead the ANC in 2024 and in the general election that will be held in 2024. So the stakes are high, and the factions have very different approaches as to what should happen.
But what would be the benefit?
Mr. Zuma seems to think he's done nothing wrong.
Apologies for interjecting there, but what would be the benefit for, let's say, former President Thabo Mbeki, who hasn't expressed any support for any candidate, or even former President Motlanthe? But in this instance, we do know that former President Jacob Zuma has expressed his support for Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. But for the other two, what would we say would be the benefit if they go on to critique or raise concern about the current state of affairs?
They are seeking to preserve the legacy of the ANC. The ANC was once known as the Party of Liberation. It has recently been called accused number one by President Ramaphosa. And on any reading of the report and recommendations of the Zondo Commission, accused number one has been found guilty. That is, the ANC has been found guilty by the Chief Justice in the report that he's made and the recommendations that he's made in relation to preventing state capture from happening again, exacting accountability from those who were involved in state capture, raking back the loot of state capture, which is over R1 trillion, and making the lot of our whistleblowers, without whom there would have been no Zondo Commission, a lot easier and better than it has been hitherto. Too many people think of whistleblowers as impimpis. Actually, whistleblowers are the heroes of the entire debacle that South Africa went through in the last decade.
No, they most certainly are the heroes. But then if we were to delve deeper into the African National Congress and talk about the renewal agenda or program, I listened to the former President Thabo Mbeki. He doesn't seem to think that the current leaders or those that have actually raised their hands can meaningfully champion the renewal agenda, because he says some of them are criminals. he actually went on to say that the renewal would be led by criminals.
Yes, and Zuma is talking about treason and corruption, which are both crimes as well. So it does mean that the stakes are high, and the bad mouthing that is going on is being ramped up in order to sway the branches of the ANC one way or another in their support of candidates at the December elective conference.
Then to the President's address tonight, what are your expectations? What would be a satisfactory address to the nation around the Zondo Commission and its report?
Yes, I think that the first thing that the President has to do is to acknowledge that cadre deployment in the public administration and in the state-owned enterprises is illegal and unconstitutional, and that he has to take steps now to phase it out as rapidly as possible. I don't think he's going to do that. We know that the ANC and the government are defending the application by the DA, in which that sort of relief is going to be determined by the courts. And we also know that the courts have already declared in the Eastern Cape, a trial court has already declared cadre deployment in the public administration to be illegal and unconstitutional. The second thing is the prevention of a recurrence of the phenomenon of state capture. There we see that since the Scorpions were closed down in 2009, and since the work of our anti-corruption parts of the criminal justice administration has been split between the police, who are meant to do investigations but are not really equipped to do complex commercial corruption cases, and the National Prosecuting Authority, which was a site of state capture of ginormous proportions. The current National Prosecuting Authority is a pale shadow of what it was when the Scorpions were in their heyday. It is unable to attract the sort of skill, talent, and experience which is required to run a complex corruption case against senior counsel who will use all the tricks that we've seen in the Zuma litigation, for example. So the reform of the criminal justice administration to introduce a specialized, properly trained, independent, fully resourced, and secure in tenure of office new institution is imperative. If the president doesn't do that, his response to the Chief Justice's report will be inadequate, and he will be looking down the barrel of litigation by civil society to see to it that the rules of the game in relation to establishing effective and efficient anti-corruption machinery of state will have to be implemented by the government, because the government is bound by what the Constitutional Court has ruled in the Glenister litigation, which ended in 2014 and has never been properly implemented because of the ravages of state capture and the attitude of the Zuma administration. Then, of course, we've mentioned the whistleblowers. I know that there is remedial legislation coming in March next year. We don't know what they are going to do. But in the meantime, it might be a good idea for the president to say that he's going to ask the Office of the Chief Justice to nominate a team of retired judges to be whistleblower ombuds and to preserve the confidentiality of our whistleblowers until such time as the NPA is able to put them in the whistleblower protection program, which already exists. The problem with that program is that you don't get any protection from it until you are nominated as a witness in a pending criminal case. So if whistleblowers can be kept under wraps, protected by retired judges who are really part of the national treasure of South Africa, then we will see our whistleblowers coming into their own, being treated as the heroes they are, being compensated for losses they sustain, and being protected from the terrible fate that far too many of them have suffered because of the culture of impunity that surrounds the corrupt in South Africa. Mm-hmm. The last thing that I would mention is the electoral system. We've seen that in South Africa, accountability has been the ugly stepsister of the foundational values of our new constitutional dispensation. And one would hope that the president, in his 76 pages of response to the Zondo Commission report, will suggest that the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission of Inquiry report be dusted down with a view to introducing some form of constituency-based representation in Parliament. The problem at the moment is that all of our parliamentarians in all of the parties are too beholden to the party bosses who actually get them into Parliament on the basis of the share of the vote and where they sit on the party list, and not sufficiently accountable to the people who voted them into Parliament. And that needs to be addressed because the lack of accountability of Parliament has turned it into a rubber stamp for the executive branch of government, and a particularly tame institution that does not fulfill its function of holding the executive branch of government, the cabinet, the president, to account for what they do. So let's hope 4 good things come out of the mouth of the president tonight. Mm-hmm. Independent anti-corruption body. We're running out of time.
Speaking of that particular independent anti-corruption body, I mean, some could easily say that the independent, or at least the independent directorate currently, investigating directorate, fulfills that role, does it not?
No, not at all. That body exists at the pleasure of the president. It can be closed down tomorrow, and you and I will be able to do nothing about it. It does not have the specialists that it needs. It does not have enough people. It does not have secure tenure of office, and it isn't able to operate with the adequacy of independence that is required when serious corruption matters have to be dealt with. The whole of the NPA is answerable to the Minister of Justice. That's part of the NPA. The ID is part of the NPA, and the Minister of Justice has final responsibility over the National Prosecuting Authority. That doesn't happen with any of the Chapter 9 institutions, and that is what should be in place insofar as our anti-corruption machinery is concerned, because otherwise it becomes the mishmash, weak situation that has led to what the NPA itself says is a 10-year backlog of serious corruption cases which have not been attended to so far.
No, Mr. Hoffman?
We need to get the money back. We need to
Let's hope indeed that the president does address some of these very important points, particularly the cadre deployment. We'd love to hear, given the recommendations thereof, where the ANC, or at least as a nation, how they plan to deal with this, because it takes us to a place of conflation of party and state. It's a very difficult one, but it will be interesting to hear what the president does say tonight. Thank you very much for your time. That's Director of Accountability now, Mr. Paul Hoffman.